So when it comes to design systems as it stands, it's built of a few elements. The first one is the typography, and we've covered that in detail, what typography actually is. These are all the fonts that we've been using or we're trying to use in the system itself, all the typefaces, the weights of those typefaces, the sizes of those typefaces, etc. We've got kerning, etc., etc. So that's one of the elements that we have. Hello, Bartosz. I hope that you're doing well, man, and healthy and everything. It's great to see you, that you've joined up. So typography. Hello, Magda. How's it going? I think that today is going to be a little bit more exciting because of the everybody's hopefully healthy and happy, but at home and relaxing. So typography is definitely the first one. If you have any questions, guys, just type them into the comments and I'll be happy to respond. Anything, you can even ask about coronavirus, etc. If I have the information, I will share it. So when it comes to typography, that's all the fonts, the sizes of those fonts, the weight of those fonts, etc., etc. Then the second one is the colors. So we want to break down how do those colors actually look like in the entire design system, how many they are, how many there are, and how we're actually using those. And then the third one is the spacing. So how do we space those elements together? Is there a module of spacing that we're using, like 6 pixels or maybe 8 points or something? That's a consistent way that we're using spacing and kind of multiplying it accordingly right the way throughout the design system, and that's something we've covered as well. Then once we have that typography, which actually includes iconography inside as well, and we have the colors specified, and we know what the spacing modules are, we can then start to build the components. And these components are buttons, tables, grids, panels, everything that uses those constraints and those rules to actually create an interactive element or a display element on the interface for the user to actually look at. So that's the components. Once we have designed a list of components, then we can break those down and actually showcase some of them in template design. So we can actually put them together into a form, an example form. We can showcase that the list of those components and how we use those on a main page or on a landing page, on a panel that we've been using on Amazon.com. So not to be. Let me just go to the layer. Come on. Switch the swatches and let's do the panel. And I will actually move this thing to the right, including this. And as you can see, this little panel is something that we would call a template. So it uses a lot of different components. Let me just go to this layer so I can actually do that. Works. Okay. So it uses all of those buttons, these lists of information, these radio buttons, this panel of text, this little drop-down menu, this little button here, all these social media icons, all of those elements are actually, depending on the granularity of the component list that we're actually creating, but these could be, as Amazon would put it, a list of components they're using, and this is actually being used on a template that we would call maybe like a panel for product listings, or panel for pricing, or panel for adding to cart, whatever you want to call this entire panel. This would, to me, it could be a template of actually showcasing how to use and how not to use some of the components. But on the basis of the granularity of the actual system or the component list, this could actually be a component in itself. So depending on what kind of a level or what kind of a size of a design system you're actually creating, this can be either a component or a template of how to put those components together. So that's something we've covered so far in our beautiful journey when it comes to design systems. And today I wanted to break down the second to last element, which is the interaction design, and that's how do we put so we know the do's and the don'ts of this whole thing within the template design, but now we would like to see how the interaction models actually work in the entire design system. And let me tell you, a lot of the systems that we're designing at 99 Grid, where we get into the gist of the thing to actually list out some of the components, etc., this element is it's very often lacking when it comes to having a standard way of interaction and all of that. And that's something that well, definitely in the recent years is something very relevant when it comes to creating modern design systems, something that actually is a little bit more fancy and a little bit more interactive and actually cool looking, if you like, when it comes to a design system. So let me just switch off this thing, but actually before we do that, let's do the coloring as we did as we do every time. So let me just color that. So today we will be covering the interaction of the design system. So I'll break down the theory behind the interaction design a little bit so you understand what interaction design actually is, what it's built of, and I'll use Amazon.com to actually showcase some of those examples. I could have actually increased the brush size, but yeah, I think we'll survive. We'll survive. Okay, so we have the interaction highlighted, and now we can actually switch off the panel itself and maybe go to Amazon.com so that I can actually showcase some of the elements. But before we get there, let me just put that what the interaction actually is. What do I mean by interaction design? And there's like, I would say, 5 points when it comes to what an interaction design is built of. And the first one, and I'll go into each one of those separately so you can actually have a very good understanding of what I actually mean. Let me just put that interaction. Very good. So the first element, and I'll maybe use a black font. Yes, let's do black. And let's see if we've got that brush. The brush size, very nice. It's supposed to be black. Let's do black. Okay. Full screen, and let's do interaction. So I'll cover some of the interaction. What interaction? Oh, actually, interaction design. Interaction design. So when it comes to interaction design, what is it built of? And the first thing is, well, something that not many people are aware of, but visibility. If you're hearing some of the background noise, that's construction that's happening right outside. So that's another resistance that we're facing today, but we're not going to get bogged down with that. Visibility, that's the first element when it comes to interaction design. How to create a good interaction model or a good interaction design. The first thing, it's got to be visible. And let's go and see Amazon.com to actually showcase what I mean. When it comes to the visibility of the elements that are interactive on the screen itself, it's first of all, let's go to maybe some product page. I think that we've been doing it using this. It was like a product page, I think it was. Let's just go with any one of those. This is cool. So we've got like a Switch Pro controller. And when it comes to the interaction, the visibility, the elements that you're trying the user to interact with, they need to be visible. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to kind of pinpoint the exact element of what I actually mean, but there's a lot of interactive elements on the screen itself. So we've got these ratings here, you've got the by Nintendo, we've got rated everyone, etc. You've got Amazon's Choice, which is not interactive. Well, it is interactive to an extent with the hover state on it. You've got the learn more here, you've got the details, and you've got all of those elements that are actually pretty interactive over here. And the visibility comes down to, first of all, it needs to be visible in the viewport. So the viewport is something that actually is from the bottom of the browser, from the bottom of the header of the browser. So right here, all the way to the bottom of the actual browser window. So anything you can see and scroll through as a user, that's your viewport. And when it comes to the first element, so visibility, the elements you're trying for the user to be interacting with need to be visible when he looks through his viewport. And that would mean that, for example, this add to cart button, it's great that it's actually here. So I went into this product page, and the first and the primary action button that's actually visible to me is the add to cart button. And let me tell you, there's a lot of designs that I've seen in the past that this actually this button ends up somewhere. Let me just I'll try and showcase that. I've zoomed in pretty dramatically, but it actually ends up below the fold line. This is the fold line. So the fold line in the interface is something, is this line at the very bottom here that kind of cuts away the visibility of the user when he's actually looking at the interface. When he gets into a new page, there is a fold line. So that's where the interface kind of folds. Before we scroll through, this is what we see. And as you can see, if we have designed this interface for this e-commerce website, like the Amazon.com, and we've put the button away or off the actual page, that's the visibility aspect of the interaction that we've actually cocked up. So that's the first element when it comes to visibility. So I would need to scroll through to actually see, hey, there's an add to cart button over there. And this is very specific to some of the. Let me just go to 100%. This is very specific to some of the forms that are being designed in the back office solutions that we sometimes have to deal with when it comes to big, let's say, banks or financial institutions. They have a lot of data that they're trying the users to actually put in, and usually the button, the primary action button, actually disappears from the interface, and it's at the very bottom of the page. And the user kind of trusts us that it is going to end up being an interactive element at the very end of that form, for example. But that's the first element, and it's not just about putting it above the fold. The second element is making it visible. So these little like details over here, I mean, this little, if we want the user to actually interact, and details for some reason would be an interesting or an important element of the actual interaction, you know, it's a pretty small element for the user to actually see. So all of the elements that you're trying the user to interact with and make them visible, the size of those elements, even if they are above the fold, that's something that's definitely something relevant. And yeah, you should be aiming at actually making them visible. Another one would be specific to this one. When we go back to kind of the structure of the design system, that's the color of the element. So this is blue, so it kind of resembles something interactive and is more visible than if we actually made this little thing more aesthetic, for example, not blue, but you know, fancy gray. And that definitely would help with the aesthetic of the thing, but it would definitely diminish the visibility of the element, and therefore have a bad influence on the actual interaction design. So that's that. Hello Krzysztof, hello Pavel, hello Adam. It's great to see you guys, that you've joined up. Any questions, fire away. I'd be happy to respond, and actually have a brief chat about well, your health to start with, if everything's fine, and yeah, where you're watching this from. So the visibility I would put down into two things. The first one would be keep the elements that are important to the user within the viewport. Yeah, so that's the first one. So within the constraint of the interface of the actual screen that the person is looking at. And the second one, if you are already keeping it within the viewport, make sure that it's actually visible through color, through size, through the placement on the screen, where it is, etc., etc. So try to make that element as visible and as kind of vivid to the user as possible, like this add to cart button above the fold and yellow, and therefore more visible. So that's that. And I'm not sure if you know why these colors like red and yellows are pretty visible to the human eye. Well, that's basically through evolution. You know, I mean, color yellow and color red, it doesn't really exist in nature very often. You know, it's a very rare color to be actually available to us in nature. So, you know, throughout the years of history, our brains and our mind's eye got used to seeing these colors kind of as something that to watch out for, something that's not as typical. So it always drags our attention. So first of all, visibility. So going back to what interaction design is, again, I can just put that into the full screen. So visibility, we've got that, and we have that covered. So that's the first element. The second element is the perceivability. Perceivability. What a word is that? Come on. Perceive. Perceivability. Man, this is you can break your tongue saying that. Perceivability. So what this is is basically making sure that whatever element is already visible on the interface, and we're trying for the user to interact with it, we want to make sure that it's perceived in a consistent manner. It's perceived as interactive. It's perceived to be located in the right area of the page, so the user is kind of used to it being over there, and it's perceived as something that is interactive. So let's break it down into an example. The biggest perceivability aspect of the interaction design is the home page or the home button. So most of the elements of the interface are on the left-hand side on the logo. And that's, I think, one of the biggest perceivability aspects of interface design on the planet, that the logo is clickable and that the logo leads you to the home page. So let's see what actually happens on Amazon.com. There you go. So something that I would perceive as being the home button, I would perceive as being something that would lead me back to a home page, actually works on Amazon, and that's perfect. So me as a user, getting used through, working away with multiple different pages throughout the history of my interaction with the internet and the browsers, I get used to the fact that the location of the logo is on the left-hand side at the very top of the screen. It's clickable, and it takes me to the home page of that entire system. And that's something that I perceive the logo to do. So as a designer, when I'm putting an interaction model together, and I try to make sure that the user actually understands what I'm trying to get that user to do, I want to make these elements as perceivable for that user as possible. So the location of the elements is definitely something that we should be keeping in mind when we create the interaction design. So for example, the left-hand side, the very top, that's the logo. The second element, as you can see here, once we have put a component like this one, like this box over here, with a photograph, with something, I don't know what this does, but it does something. And there is a link at the very left, at the very bottom of this panel. As you can see, it has been showcased the same way, right the way throughout the panels, and it's always there at the same place. Apart from this one, which is interesting, why that has been changed, and that's kind of it always puts a question mark in the back of my head. Why is this panel different? Is it because it's the first? Is it because there's a high Andrew there? I don't know. Might be. So, but at the end of the day, the location of the element, as well as how I perceive it being interactive, is something very crucial, and that's the second element of this whole story. And this brings me down, well, location we've covered, right? So it's located in a perceivable place, and let's go back to the recently viewed. And another one, another aspect of the perceivability is that I perceive that the element is actually interactive. So again, using the blue color links, and with the underline, for example, as well. That goes back to the Internet 1.0. This has happened in the 90s, when we were dialing into the Internet. The first links looked like this. They were blue, and they had an underline underneath them. And it's, again, something that we can use because we can anticipate that the user is going to perceive those elements as interactive. And as you can see here, they change the color, and they do create a little bit of an underline underneath them. And obviously the cursor also changes to this little like a hand cursor. So it definitely is interactive, and this is something that we are trying to fulfill within the perceivability aspect of the actual design system. So that whenever we put out an element that is interactive, we want to make sure that once we have created one element, it is consistently being applied the same way, in the same location, in the same color, in the same interaction model, so that we can actually teach the user that this element is interactive. But we'll get into the learnability aspects of those, which is another aspect of the design system. So when we put these things together, we try to make sure that we kind of imagine the user or the person that actually going to be kind of interacting with us, to make sure that it is perceived interactive. So the blue elements, we can see some of the elements when it comes to an arrow over here, a button, some of the hover states, everything that we can do to make sure that we kind of attract the user to interact with those elements, and then keeping it consistent is definitely something that we want to make sure. So using buttons, links, using the locations of those elements appropriately, using icons, etc., etc. That's definitely something that we want to make sure that that's understandable to the end user. So that's the second element. Make those elements perceivable as being interactive. So that's the second element. And then we go back to our little list. And the third element, which is pretty crucial, and I think this is one of the most important things when it comes to interaction design, and that's feedback. The feedback of each interaction element, because that's what makes it interactive, right? So I can interact with it and something happens, and the feedback happens. So going back to Amazon.com, if I click this element over here, something happens. You know, this little drop down or search field is actually being shown. If I go to details, you know, a little bit of an additional pop-up window or even a browser window is actually being exposed to me. So that's that. If I click this one, you know, a little drop-down list is actually being shown, and then the same goes for this one. And then if we go to maybe hovering on top of some of those photographs, as you can see, depending on the element, there is a specific interaction. I can click on those photographs and nothing really changes. So to me, I would definitely have a think about if this is an example of an interaction that I would do, because there is an interaction on the hover state. So I just hover over the element and it actually interacts with me, which is great. But then when I click on it, apart from it being highlighted with this little yellow kind of drop shadow and a border, nothing really happens. So I would say maybe we could leverage that a little bit, maybe into a full screen or a model screen with this specific photograph or something. To me, just highlighting it with a little border, I'm not sure if this is something that I would go for. Maybe I would kind of turn it around and say that I hover over it, it doesn't change the photograph, I click on it, and then it reveals the photograph. But that's a judgment call. That's something we need to look at in the design. But I think that I would probably approach this a little bit differently when it comes to design system itself. So that's the interactivity and the feedback of that interface. So we want to make sure that whenever we do click anything, it actually provides the user with a consistent interaction, with a consistent feedback. So whatever I do, wherever I go around the design system, it actually is being very there's a lot of feedback to me as a user. So that's that. I guess that pretty much wraps it up. So I click on an element and it actually gives me feedback. And let me tell you, there's a lot of examples, like when you are filling out a form, for example, and you put some of the information in, and then you click the next button and nothing happens. Because, for example, all the notification elements, like the validation of the form, all the errors you've done, all the warnings that are accustomed with the data that you've put in, are actually being shown outside of the viewport, at the very top of the form, for example. So you filled out a long form. Let me actually just show you an example. So if this is our viewport, and this is what the user sees, right? So right here, let me just draw that with this one. So that's what the user sees, right? But obviously, the browser is a little bit longer than that. Well, the page is a little bit longer than that. And we have a form that we fill out. And it's a pretty, let's say, a longish form, right? So there's a long form, a lot of data to be put in, and there's a primary action button on the very bottom of it saying that, yes, click me, you are done, check the form, have you done it right, etc., etc. There is obviously some sort of a go to the next step, etc., something on that button. And the problem here is that, when I do fill out that form, I very often get, I need to scroll down the window. So I need to move this little viewport of ours to the very bottom here, through the scroll, and basically move the viewport to somewhere around here to actually see the button and finish the form. And there's a lot of cases that I've worked on in the past that when I do click the button, nothing really happens. But it did really happen, it's just outside of the viewport. And that's something that a lot of companies actually cock up. And because it's easier sometimes, for some reason, to show all of the errors associated with this form over here. So they just list out all of the errors, but they do not scroll the window to the very top. They just leave it there, sitting there. So you're clicking like trying to figure out, okay, what is happening? You know, I'm trying to get to the next page. What is happening? And nothing really happens. So the feedback itself is wrong. I mean, it is existing, it's just not visible. So, and also there's a problem with the perceivability, because I perceive this button to be interactive and I click it. So because I perceive it as a button, it's clickable, you know, the cursor changes, it should work with me. So I click it and there is no feedback, because the feedback actually happens outside of the viewport, so it's not visible to me, etc., etc., etc. So all of those elements, they actually create a structure of us as designers to think about how to put those things together. So that's the feedback element, and it's pretty crucial, very important, one of the most important elements on the screen itself, in the interaction design itself. So that's the feedback. And then again, another element, actually let's go back to Photoshop, because I wanted to cover one more element. So feedback we've got, and then we have something we call learnability. So that's really a showcase of how learnable the interaction model actually is. So what happens when we click around, and how many different interaction can we expect, and how consistent are they? Looking at Amazon.com, for example, if we go to this link, it creates this brand new window, right? If we go to this link for the details, let's see what happens there. There's a drop-down menu, and it's exactly the same word, it's the same color, it's the same interaction with a different result. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, an error when it comes to interaction design. I didn't even think that that's what's going to happen, but it's an interaction design fault. It shouldn't work this way, because an element that looks the same, acts the same, should actually give us the same result. But for some reason, this one does not. So these details highlight this new panel, and these details show us a drop-down menu. You know, so I know that at the very level of the interaction, they're both interactive elements and they do something. But when you get all of those elements together, and they're, for example, they're really crucial to the user for some reason, it's really hard to learn that, you know, if I had to teach somebody that operates this interface about the details tabs, and I'll be like, okay, John, so the free shipping details, remember that they're going to open in a separate window, and the details at the used very good details, they're going to give you a drop-down menu. So it requires a lot of thought, it requires a lot of memory to actually store that differentiation between those two elements, and these are just two links, guys. So it definitely is something that I would look at, and either, I don't know, change the wording, change the link, or maybe, because it is giving us a tooltip at the very bottom, maybe do a little bit of an arrow, or maybe an icon that actually describes that it's an additional information thing when it comes to these details, just to differentiate between those two elements of interaction, because they look similarly, but they do separate things. So just to give a little bit of an aid to the user. So that's another one. What about this link? What's this one going to do? Okay, so this one opens up a brand new page. So we've got like 3 links that pretty much look the same thing when it comes to the interaction. They do different things. And that's something that brings me back to this learnability aspect of the interaction design. We want to keep those interactions as consistent and as learnable and as simple as possible, because we want to make sure that they are learnable, that when I click design, or when I click the details tab over here, it actually does the same thing when I click this one, because I reinforce that memory within, you know, the end user's brain, if you like. So I'm putting a consistent way of interaction and the feedback and the visibility, etc., so that the user can then learn it very easily, because wherever he goes, he clicks on details. I know what's going to happen, because I've clicked this element before, and I expect it to do the same thing. So when we keep it consistent, when we keep it in the same place, we keep it visible, we keep it interactive, we give the same feedback, we allow the user to learn the interaction model very easily. And that's something that's really rare, you know, and that's something specifically when it comes to these complex systems like Amazon.com, when it comes to these complex back office solutions. It definitely creates a lot of bother, a lot of problems for the users themselves. So that's something I would definitely check, make sure that it actually works and makes sense to the user. So that's element number 4. And the last but not least, it's something that I've touched on already, and that's consistency. Consistency. Which kind of is similar to learnability, because you can make it learnable through making it consistent. But consistency is the last element of this whole thing. So you need to make sure that if it is visible, it's visible consistently in one place. If it is perceivable the same way, like a button or the logo type or something, it actually is perceivable right the way through. If you are providing a feedback to a specific element, you click on it and it actually shows something to the user, you make sure that it's actually consistent, so that the people actually using your interface can actually learn it a lot easier. So the learnability aspect grows exponentially, if you like, when it comes to keeping those 3 elements at the very beginning very consistent. And that's a wrap. So that's the interaction design when it comes to what it actually is, what it's built of, and how it all works on the basis of that example. And to give you a little bit of a pointer at to how to maybe get yourselves inspired when it comes to interaction design, to make them, you know, nice and beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, etc. Now you know what it's built of. Amazon is definitely, I would say, not the way to get inspired when it comes to these interaction models. But I would give you 2 examples. The first one would be words. So if you go to awards, this is like a page that actually summarizes. They give awards to the best out there when it comes to creating interactive websites, etc. So the way to actually get inspired with interaction design, I always do this. I always go to awards, try to see what is the fresh and new out there, to see what's cool. As you can see here, you know, there's a hover state interaction over here that gives us this little bit of a zoom in, but I actually mean the actual pages themselves. So you can visit the site and see what it's all about. Wow, this is pretty exciting. But when it comes to interaction, you know, there's a lot of hover state interactions. So you just hover over the projects. There's a little dash that actually animates. These are these little micro interactions that happen when I actually hover on some of those elements. What happens if I do that? Oh, that's another micro interaction. So it's actually pretty cool. So the X actually rolls a little bit to the right. That actually shows or kind of collapses the menu itself. But you can see that there's one thing that's a little bit of an issue when it comes to this interaction. So as you can see here, hover state for the projects creates this little bit of an underlined element underneath. But when I actually close the menu and then I hover over the project, miraculously, the underline has disappeared on the hover state. So that would be something I would highlight to designers, and I would say, guys, doesn't work. Let's keep it consistent. Why is it? You know, the first menu element and it's not working as I would assume, but the Instagram link is working properly, and this one, for some reason, isn't. So the interaction itself, how it works, you know, what's happening here. You know, you've got these little beautiful hover states. They're pretty dramatic, so I don't know if I would go that far, but definitely awards is something that I would check out heavily when it comes to getting inspired about, you know, what kind of interaction models could be interesting to you and your projects. So definitely would check out that. There's a lot of ways to actually go through those. There's thousands of pages there, so you can actually go, like, maybe just check out the winners. Then you can go maybe categories. Let's see some I don't know, design agencies, or maybe let's do e-commerce and see what are the best e-commerce winners out there, and see some of the product pages maybe for this one, and then visit the site for some reason, just to have a look at, you know, what it looks like, how it interacts with us. See, this is the problem when it comes to, I would anticipate that it's actually draggable, clickable, etc., but it isn't. It's just a GIF. So These are all the elements that I would definitely look at when it comes to how those buttons work, etc., etc. There's a lot of cool parallax elements here, yeah, like interaction with this little tooltips. You can change the color, etc. So all of those elements, it's something I would get totally inspired by and check out as many as possible. So that's the first one, just as a designer to get inspired with some of those elements. But then if you are working together with some of the developers, that's something, it's called tympanus, it's called drops, useful resources, and that's what I would use maybe as a second inspiration for you guys. And this is closer to when you're in a dev house. There's a lot of source code here, so you can actually go to the playground and then just go, let's say, distorted link effects SVG files, and I can just go back, and each one of those elements actually has in the playground. I'll go back to the playground. So the playground has got a lot of different ways of showcasing some cool interaction elements, like unroll images with 3.js, creative WebGL image transitions, etc., etc. There's a lot of different examples. There's a massive list. You can search through those as well, but let's maybe go with creative image transitions, for example. So you go into here, you've got the entire kind of description of what it's all about. But then again, we can actually download the source, and you can view the demo of it as well. So if you are closer with the developers, you can definitely get here and download the source, the code, etc. So you can actually use it a little bit easier, I guess. But yeah, as you can see, there's quite a few different ways of interaction here. So there's like demos, so you can see different ways of showcasing the imagery. Whoa, that's something. So you can play around with it, have a lot of fun, and see what it's all about. So I would go with awards, and I would go with tympanus.net and awards.com to get inspired and see what kind of levels of interactions, as long as they're consistent, visible, perceivable, learnable, and consistent, and have a good feedback. That's something I would definitely have a look at. And that's pretty much a wrap, guys. So when it comes to, again, interaction, we've covered that. So it's visibility, perceivability, feedback, learnability, and consistency. And that's what creates a consistent design, interaction design within the design system. Make sure that you try to achieve all of the 5 and hit all of those 5 with your projects as well.